0 o'clock to 1:30. Cold open. Narrator, February 2nd, 1959. A remote mountain pass in the northern Ural Mountains of Soviet Russia. Temperature, -30 degrees Celsius. Wind speeds capable of stripping flesh from bone. 9 experienced hikers, some of the most skilled mountaineers in the Soviet Union, set up their tent on the eastern slope of a peak called Kholat Syakhl. In the Mansi language, the indigenous people of this region, that name translates to Dead Mountain. Narrator. They would never leave that slope alive. Narrator. When search teams finally reached the camp 9 days later, they found a scene so disturbing, so contradictory, so utterly inexplicable, that Soviet authorities immediately classified the investigation files. The lead investigator reportedly wrote that the hikers had died as a result of an unknown compelling force. That phrase would haunt researchers for the next 60 years, because no matter how many experts examined the evidence, no matter how many theories were proposed, that unknown compelling force was never conclusively identified. Narrator. This is the Dyatlov Pass Incident, and the deeper you look, the stranger it gets. 1:30 to 3 o'clock. The group and the expedition. Narrator. The group was led by Igor Dyatlov, a 23-year-old engineering student at the Ural Polytechnic Institute. He was not a novice. He was a certified mountaineer who had completed dozens of difficult expeditions across Soviet Russia. The 9 members of his team were similarly experienced. Among them were Zenaida Kolmogorova, one of the most beloved students at the institute, Rustam Slobodin, a mechanical engineer, Yuri Doroshenko, Alexander Kolovatov, and 4 others, including Semyon Zolotaryov, a 38-year-old war veteran who was older than the rest and had only recently joined the group. Narrator. Their goal was to reach Mount Otorten, rated a Category 3 difficulty hike, the highest classification in Soviet mountaineering at the time. It was a grueling but achievable objective for a group of their caliber. They departed from the city of Ivdel on January 23rd, traveling by train, then truck, then on foot through deep snow. Narrator. On January 28th, one member of the group, Yuri Yudin, turned back due to illness. It was the luckiest decision of his life. He would be the only one to return home. The remaining 9 pressed on toward the mountain. On the night of February 1st, instead of camping in the valley where they would have had shelter from the wind, Dyatlov made an unusual decision. He ordered the group to set up camp on the exposed slope of Kholat Syakhl. Some researchers believe they were trying to save time. Others believe something was already wrong. Whatever the reason, it was the last decision Igor Dyatlov ever made. 3 o'clock to 5 o'clock. The Discovery. Narrator. When the group failed to send their scheduled telegram on February 12th, family members began to worry. Soviet authorities were slow to act, but eventually a search party was dispatched. On February 26th, searchers found the tent. What they saw defied immediate understanding. Narrator. The tent had been sliced open from the inside, not unzipped, not torn by an outside force. Cut open deliberately from within, as though the occupants had needed to escape so urgently that they could not take the 2 seconds required to use the entrance. The tent was still standing. The hikers' belongings were still inside. Their boots were inside. Their coats were inside. Their food was inside. Whatever drove those 9 people out of that tent into -30-degree temperatures, it was something that gave them no time to dress. Narrator. The first 2 bodies were found about a mile from the tent, near the remains of a small fire at the tree line. Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonyshenko were discovered in their underwear. They had frozen to death. Branches above the fire showed signs that someone had climbed the tree, apparently trying to see something in the distance. 3 more bodies were found between the tent and the tree line, appearing to have died while trying to crawl back toward the tent. One of them was Igor Dyatlov himself. Narrator. But the final 4 bodies, discovered 2 months later buried under 4 meters of snow in a ravine, told a far more disturbing story. These were not simply deaths from hypothermia. These deaths showed physical trauma that investigators struggled to explain. Nikolai Thibault Brignoles had severe skull fractures. Lyudmila Dubinina and Semyon Zolotaryov had catastrophic chest injuries, broken ribs crushed inward with a force the medical examiner compared to a car crash. There were no external wounds, no bruising on the skin. Whatever had broken their bones had done so from the inside out, or with a force so precise and so immense that it left no surface marks. Narrator, and Lyudmila Dubinina was missing her tongue, her eyes, her lips. Parts of her face were simply gone. 5 o'clock to 7 o'clock. The evidence that makes no sense. Narrator, Soviet investigators examined every piece of evidence available to them, and almost every piece raised more questions than it answered. Narrator, the hiker's clothing, when tested, showed elevated levels of radiation, not all of the clothing, specific pieces, particularly those belonging to Krivonashenko. Investigators noted that the contamination appeared consistent with radioactive particles, not simple environmental exposure. The source of this contamination was never explained. Narrator, witnesses in the region, including other hikers and meteorological observers stationed nearby, reported seeing strange glowing orange spheres in the sky over the Ural Mountains during the nights surrounding the incident. These reports were logged and included in the investigative file. Soviet authorities acknowledged the sightings but offered no explanation. Narrator, the skin of several victims had taken on an unusual orange or brown discoloration. Investigators attributed this to decomposition, but the timing did not fully align. Some of the bodies showed this discoloration when discovered in conditions that should not have produced it so rapidly. Narrator, the physical trauma to the 4 bodies in the ravine remained the most confounding detail. Forensic experts in 1959 stated plainly that the force required to produce those internal injuries without external bruising was something they had never encountered before. That assessment has not changed significantly in the decades since. 7 o'clock to 9 o'clock. The theory's narrator. In the 60-plus years since the incident, researchers, scientists, governments, and amateur investigators have proposed dozens of explanations. None of them are complete. None of them account for every detail. Narrator, the avalanche theory suggests the hikers heard or felt the early signs of a snowslide and fled the tent in panic. A 2021 study published in the journal Communications, Earth and Environment used computer modeling to suggest that a small, unusual slab avalanche could have produced the injuries found on the victims. It was the most scientifically rigorous attempt at an explanation ever published. And yet, critics immediately pointed out that there was no physical evidence of an avalanche at the site. Search teams who arrived days later found no disturbed snow around the tent. The tent itself was still standing. Narrator, the infrasound theory proposes that the specific geography of the mountain pass created infrasound waves, low-frequency sound below the threshold of human hearing, which at certain intensities can induce panic, disorientation, hallucinations, and even chest compression. Infrasound has been studied in connection with reported hauntings and mass panic events. It is a real phenomenon, but whether it could produce the specific injuries found on the Dyatlov victims has never been demonstrated. Narrator, military testing theories suggest the Soviet government was conducting secret weapons tests in the region, possibly involving pressure-based or experimental munitions that could explain both the internal injuries and the radiation. This theory gained some traction from the unusual speed with which Soviet authorities classified the investigation and restricted access to the area for 3 years afterward. The Soviet government never offered a satisfying explanation for that restriction. Narrator, there are theories involving the Mansi people, the indigenous population of the region, though investigators found no evidence of any human presence at the camp aside from the 9 victims. There are theories involving secret military parachutists, escaped prisoners from nearby gulags, even extraterrestrial activity. Each theory explains some details and fails to explain others. Narrator, in 2019, Russian prosecutors officially reopened the Dyatlov investigation. After 2 years of examination, they concluded that the most likely cause was an avalanche combined with extreme weather conditions. The families of the victims and most independent researchers rejected this conclusion as incomplete. The case was closed again without consensus. 9 o'clock to 10:30. The unanswerable questions. Narrator, here is what we know with certainty. 9 experienced hikers who had no reason to abandon their tent did so in the middle of the night in deadly cold without their shoes or their coats. They died in ways that ranged from simple hypothermia to catastrophic internal trauma. Some of their clothing was radioactive. Parts of one victim were missing entirely. Witnesses reported unidentified lights in the sky. The Soviet government classified the files for decades. Narrator, here is what we cannot explain. Why they left. What broke their bones from the inside.